on World News Tonight. Bidding farewell, Her Majesty the late Queen Elizabeth makes her final journey with an outpouring of her people saying their final goodbyes. Climate carnage, Pakistan in need of major aid as ceaseless floods continue to ravage the country. And 21 years later, families of the victims of the terror attack of 9/11 keep their memories alive with emotional remembrances. Magical mid-autumn, China celebrates the end of autumn harvest with spectacular displays of fireworks.
This is Derana World News Tonight. Reporting from Colombo, here is Suzanne Shanali.
A very good evening and thank you for joining us on World News Tonight. Now, 3 days following the death of Her Majesty at a Scottish retreat in Balmoral, Queen Elizabeth II made her final journey. The coffin was driven across Scotland to Edinburgh, where it was laid to rest at the Palace of Holyrood House. We have Derana World News special correspondent Ranusha De Silva, who joins us now from Kent in the United Kingdom to give us more updates. Ranusha?
Yes, Shanali. After a 300-kilometre journey, the royal hearse carrying Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II arrived at the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh yesterday and arrived in Westminster Abbey today for people to pay respect. 8 military pallbearers, followed by Her Majesty's daughter, Princess Anne, and her husband Tim Lawrence, took the body to the throne room, where it will spend the night. As the hours passed, many tributes could be seen on the sides of the road, where the Queen would pass through for the final time. People could also be seen throwing flowers on the road as Her Majesty's hearse was going along towards Edinburgh. King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla attended the Parliament's expression of condolences at Westminster Abbey, where MPs and peers from both the House of Lords and the House of Commons met to express their condolences. King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla will fly to Edinburgh, where the King will walk behind the Queen's coffin from the Palace of Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral. The King will later meet Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon before he attends Scottish Parliament to receive a motion of condolences. Back to you, Shanali.
All right, thank you. That was the World News special correspondent Ranusha De Silva reporting from Kent in the United Kingdom. The newest monarch of the United Kingdom now faces a new problem. Commonwealth countries that historically were part of the Britain's conquered territory are beginning to consider pulling away. Many citizens of the kingdom's dominions also believe that the system makes no sense following the Queen's demise.
When the King met with members of the monarch's Commonwealth nations today,
Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, Your Majesty.
It highlighted how the British Empire that once ruled 400 million people, a quarter of the world's population, has shrunk. Today there are 56 independent nations, mostly former British colonies, that are loosely members of the Commonwealth. Of those, 14 outside the UK are the Commonwealth realms, which means they now recognize the new king as their head of state. An April poll in Canada showed as long as the Queen was alive, 55% wanted to remain a constitutional monarchy. But in her death, only 34% thought the system made sense.
It's going to be very interesting to see what does happen to the royal family and its influence around the world.
Australia's Prime Minister saying today the Queen's death not a catalyst for change.
The bigger questions about our constitution are not ones for this current period.
Last year, Barbados decided to become a republic, meaning the British monarch is no longer its head of state, though the island country is still a member of the Commonwealth. In Jamaica, a vocal push for a similar withdrawal. As Prince William and Princess Kate discovered when they visited Jamaica in March, the enslaved descendants demand a formal apology.
A string of Dominion realms and former colonies marked the loss of a shared figurehead and an irreplaceable link to the quickly fading era. We take a look back at the Queen Elizabeth II's special relationship with Africa.
In 1952, Elizabeth II arrived in Kenya as a princess and left 5 days later as a queen.
But in Kenya, the princess learned that the king was dead, she herself the queen.
That was the Queen's second trip to the continent. Her first was in 1947 when she travelled to South Africa. That's where she gave a speech on her 21st birthday expressing her dedication to the Commonwealth.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
Shortly after becoming queen, Elizabeth II was faced with a fast-changing empire as colonies in Africa gained independence and became republics. But even at a young age, the Queen used her charm and influence to get the newly independent nations to remain within the Commonwealth. Ghana was the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to gain independence, and in 1961 the Queen made a visit there, despite some politicians saying it wasn't a good idea. At the time, Ghana was going through a difficult time, with the President Kwame Nkrumah turning to authoritarianism and leaning towards the Soviet Union. But it was during this visit that the Queen made history by dancing with the man who replaced her as Ghana's head of state. It was a hugely symbolic moment. A white woman, a queen, dancing with a black man who was a former subject of the British Empire. The trip set a precedent for other African countries and played a part in changing the course of history.
A scintillating show that reflected the brilliance of the tour, during which the Queen had won the sincere admiration and affection of the people of Ghana.
Nkrumah dropped his plans to leave the Commonwealth, and the United States ended up funding part of the Akosombo Dam in southeastern Ghana.
In France, Britain's historic rival and contemporary ally, officials ordered flags at the presidential palace and public buildings be lowered to half-staff. President Macron said no other foreign sovereign had visited the presidential palace more often than Queen Elizabeth, who knew all 8 presidents of the contemporary France.
Queen Elizabeth has visited France 13 times, more than any other country in Europe. From René Coty to the incumbent Emmanuel Macron, the Queen hasn't only lived through key moments in French history, she's also played a part in it. Her last state visit to France was in 2014, when she participated in commemorations for the D-Day landings alongside François Hollande and Barack Obama. And all eyes were on her as the only head of state to have actually participated in World War II. During her visit, the monarch received love from the French, a feeling she said was mutual. It was in 1948 the then princess took her first solo trip abroad, and she chose France. It didn't take her long to charm the nation. A keen Francophile, it would be the first time she'd impress with her fluent French, which she'd learned as a child. In 1960, she welcomed Charles de Gaulle as a hero of World War II. And given her role in the wartime effort, she had a great respect for the first leader of the Fifth Republic. Next to visit was Georges Pompidou, then Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, whose royal wave made her smile, and he was even gifted a puppy from the Queen's kennels. Relations between the two nations were taken up a notch when the monarch inaugurated the Channel Tunnel with President Mitterrand, which went on to become a symbol of Franco-British ties. Presidents Jacques Chirac, Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande would also witness the affection the Queen had for France. And most recently, Emmanuel Macron, who she hosted in 2019 for the 75th anniversary of D-Day in Portsmouth. Throughout her life, she came to France not just for official visits, but also many times for her beloved horse racing. Thus, it was only fitting that President Macron gifted her a horse to mark her Platinum Jubilee this June.
Let's go into a short commercial break. We'll be back soon with more world news. Welcome back to World News Tonight. Now, Denmark's Queen Margrethe has scaled back her celebrations of 5 decades on the throne in respect of her late first cousin, Queen Elizabeth II. The celebrations were initially meant to occur in January, but was postponed due to COVID complications.
As one European country mourns the loss of its queen, another is celebrating its queen's 50-year reign, though with less fanfare than originally planned. Denmark's popular Queen Margrethe II is marking her Golden Jubilee, a celebration that was originally postponed in January because of COVID-19 and that is now being scaled back because of the death of her third cousin, Queen Elizabeth II. The 82-year-old inherited the throne in January 1972, making her the first woman to do so in Denmark. She since became the monarch with the highest approval rating in the world, with the support of more than 80% of the people in her country. Only 45% of Danes supported the monarchy when she took the throne.
Very exciting. We are, of course, sorry about the loss of the Queen in England, Elizabeth, but it's nice to know that we in Denmark are a little special now because we still have our Queen to guide us.
Well, we have been looking forward to celebrate her for so long. Her Jubilee was in January, but because of Corona, we had to postpone it until today. So we're happy that we can at least see her and celebrate her today.
Queen Margrethe II is now both Europe's only reigning queen and its longest-serving monarch, followed by her first cousin, Carl XVI Gustaf of Sweden. During her time on the throne, she had been credited with modernizing her country's monarchy. For example, she let her sons marry commoners, and she's also known for her involvement in their country's cultural scene, working as both a painter and a costume designer.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is calling out for help for flood-ravaged Pakistan following his extensive tour of the most damaged areas. The floods have since displaced over hundreds of thousands, including vulnerable groups such as heavily pregnant mothers. Guterres called the scene a climate carnage.
Villagers wading waist-deep through submerged farmland in flood-ravaged Mahir, Pakistan. After months of heavy monsoon rains, at least 1,396 people have been killed and millions more have been left homeless. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has toured some of the worst affected areas on his two-day visit of the country. He described the disaster as climate carnage.
I've seen many humanitarian disasters in the world, but I have never seen climate carnage on this scale. I have simply no words to describe what I've seen today. A flooded area that is 3 times the total area of my own country, Portugal.
Guterres also visited displaced families at camps in the Larkana district with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. So far, UN agencies in several countries have sent nearly 60 plane loads of aid. Kilometres of cotton and sugarcane crops, banana orchards and vegetable fields in the Sindh and Baluchistan provinces have been destroyed by the torrents. Experts are blaming global warming for this disaster, but say Pakistan is only responsible for 0.4% of the world's emissions to date.
Ukraine is pushing back against Russian forces at an unprecedented rate, reclaiming territory at lightning speed. With new efforts in liberating more regions, the Russians are forced to retreat. However, the enemy troops are not leaving much room for error in the conflict as well.
Tonight, in a lightning-fast advancement, Ukraine is quickly seizing ground.
Slava Ukraini!
The counteroffensive gaining momentum and showing no signs of slowing.
So we have to win, and this counteroffensive shows that we can win.
Slava Ukraini! Героям слава!
Today, on the 200th day of war, Ukraine announced its troops reclaimed more than 1,100 square miles from the Russians, liberating more settlements in the east, crippling Russia's grip in the Kharkiv region and forcing the Russians to retreat. Burned out tanks and fresh artillery left behind. And there's a deepening crisis at Europe's largest nuclear plant. The 6th and last working reactor shut down by Ukrainian energy officials after crews at the plant managed to restore an external line, the plant's only source of power. A precarious situation made even worse because the shelling seen for weeks keeps coming. Experts say if the power line is struck again by artillery, the plant will be forced to run on backup generators that run on diesel. But there's only a 10-day supply of fuel.
It has been 21 years, but the memories of the lost loved ones are still fresh in the minds of all affected families as thousands gather to further immortalize the somber moments of the 9/11 terror attacks in the United States.
On this day of remembrance, somber moments of silence. Emotional tributes at Ground Zero have become tradition.
Asia S. Cotton. Maria, I don't know when this weight in my chest is gonna go away, but it's gonna be there, I guess, until they lay me down beside you.
Uncle Jimmy, I'm so proud to be named after you. You're my hero.
Nino, one thing I'm sure, I was there from day one, looking for you. From the first hour I received a phone call. Thanks to you looking over me.
Vice President Harris joined families remembering those lost in the terrorist attacks when 2 planes struck the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center in New York City on 9/11.
We'll never forget.
At the Pentagon, President Biden vowing to always defend the nation from terrorists and remembering Queen Elizabeth, who stood with America on the day of the attacks.
He poignantly reminded us, quote, "Grief is the price we pay for love."
In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the First Lady joined others in the open field, remembering those heroes who stormed the cockpit of United Flight 93.
This is the legacy we must carry forward. Hope that defies hate. Love that defies loss. And the ties that hold us together.
In Roseville, California, firefighters paying their respects. Back at Ground Zero,
Never forget.
Gordon Huey's sister, Susan, died in the North Tower. He still vividly remembers the day he lost his best friend.
We were like 2 peas in a pod. We were so close. She was my best friend, my confidant, so I miss her a lot.
Voters in Sweden rush to polling booths as the country decides on a new government. As it stands, the results are much to a closed call, many believing that the vote is the start of a new right opposition rule as opposed to the existing Social Democrat reign.
Sweden is in the grips of a nail-biter election. Current Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson says it's too close to call. And her main rival says a preliminary result won't be ready until Wednesday. It initially appeared the vote had tipped towards the right bloc by the narrowest of margins, a scenario that would likely make moderate party leader Ulf Kristersson prime minister with help from an anti-immigration party. Now the country is waiting to see if it will stick with a known commodity or lurch to the right. On the campaign trail, parties battled it out over who was toughest on gang crime following a rise in shootings, surging inflation, and the energy crisis following the invasion of Ukraine. Andersson took the helm as the country's first female prime minister a year ago, her Social Democrats having been in power for the last 8 years. Kristersson cast himself as the only candidate who could unite the right and unseat her. He spent years deepening ties with the Sweden Democrats, an anti-immigration party initially shunned by all others. The Sweden Democrats, who call for slashing asylum immigration to virtually zero, and which has white supremacists among its founders, are now increasingly part of the mainstream right. The prospect of the party having a say in government divided voters. Kristersson has said he would look to possibly form a government with other small parties and only rely on the Sweden Democrats for support in parliament. Still, negotiations to form a government in a polarized political landscape are likely to be long and difficult. Overseas and some postal votes are also still yet to be counted and could affect the results.
Welcome back to World News Tonight, and for more news, let's take you around the world in a minute. Typhoon Muifa brought heavy rains, violent winds, and officials warn of high waves as it passed close to Ishikagi Island in Japan's Okinawa prefecture. National Weather Service issued a flash flood warning for parts of northeastern Illinois, including Chicago's northeastern metro areas, after heavy rains flooded viaducts, stranded cars, and sent water surging into basements. Spanish teenager Carlos Alcaraz claimed his first Grand Slam title and takes the world's #1 title. He's the youngest world #1 since the ATP ratings began in 1973, breaking the mark set by Lleyton Hewitt. President Xi Jinping will leave China for the first time in more than 2 years for a trip this week to Central Asia, where he will meet Russia's Vladimir Putin. And that's all the news we got for you tonight. Join us again tomorrow for more news around the globe. And in case you missed to watch any of the stories we aired tonight, you can always rewatch by catching us on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Derana English. And we leave you tonight with the celebrations of the Mid-Autumn Festival, celebrated all through China. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe and have a good night.